Westernspring Television. Ours it is.
Senate approves upward review of Ways and Means loan from 5 to 15%. President Muhammadu Buhari and former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta urged President-elect Bola Tinubu to work towards uniting Nigerians. Plateau State government domesticates child rights law on Children's Day. On the foreign scene, Germans working in education and cultural sectors to be expelled from Russia next month. Good evening. This is News at 7 on Westernspring Television. My name is Damilola Raphael. The Senate has approved the upward review of the Ways and Means loan accessible to the federal government from 5 to 15%. Ways and Means is the money that the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, lends to the federal government to augment spending based on the time the revenue is generated within the same year. At an emergency plenary session today, Senate leader Senator Ibrahim Gobe says the amendment is consequential as it is to enable the federal government to embark on very important projects that will rejig the economy. The Senate recently approved the request of President Muhammadu Buhari to restructure the 22.7 trillion naira loan from the CBN extended to the federal government under its Ways and Means provision. Meanwhile, the Senate also amended the 2022 Supplementary Appropriation Act to extend the implementation year from the 30th of June to the 31st of December 2023. This was to allow full implementation of the budget, especially in light of the 2022 supplementary budget approved in December 2022. At the start of the plenary, Senate President Ahmed Lawan apologized for the emergency session, saying it was convened to hasten the implementation of the 2022 supplementary budget. Moving on, outgoing President Muhammadu Buhari and former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta today tasked the President-elect Bola Tinubu to work towards uniting Nigerians irrespective of ethnic and political affiliation. Both leaders gave the charge during the inauguration lecture at the International Conference Center in Abuja. The appeal is coming barely 48 hours before the swearing-in ceremony of the President-elect and his Vice President-elect Kashim Shettima at the Eagle Square in Abuja. In his keynote address, Mr. Kenyatta pleaded with the incoming President of Nigeria to unite the country irrespective of ethnic, political, and religious cleavages that may exist. President Buhari re-echoed Mr. Kenyatta's appeal, stressing that the inauguration lecture highlighted the imperatives of democratic governance, nation building, and various challenges that confront the socio-political fabrics of Nigeria. He emphasized that Nigerians can overcome their differences if they agree to work together and practice true democracy.
As president, you must learn very quickly to lead those who love you and those who loathe you with equal passion and commitment, because you are now the father of all. Your Excellency, when countries are in election mode, the people and its leaders are more divided than ever and boxed into their various sectarian and partisan interests. However, when you are the head of state and you take command of the country's armed forces, you become the embodiment of the sum total of the many different ethnic groups, religions that make up your country, and you become the symbol of unity. Indeed, you become the face.
Today, we have embarked on a journey of introspection, enlightenment, and collective growth. We have delved deep into the theme of deepening democracy for development and explored the lessons that will guide us as we transition to a new era. Throughout this lecture, we have recognized the challenges and divisions that have tested the very fabric of our nation. We have confronted the harsh realities of inequality, the persistence of corruption, and the imperative to empower all citizens. But more importantly, we have unearthed the transformative power of democracy and the immense potential it holds for our great nation.
Uplift our nation. As Winston Churchill said, truth is so precious that it has to be.
Vice President-elect Kashim Shettima has addressed concerns that he and his principal, Bola Tinubu, have an agenda to Islamize Nigeria. Since Senator Tinubu announced that Senator Shettima as his running mate last year, there have been divergent views by different groups and individuals, with some alleging that the Muslim ticket of the ruling All Progressives Congress could be employed to Islamize Nigeria. But speaking as a lecturer in Abuja, forming part of the events around Senator Tinubu's inauguration on May 29th, the incoming vice president allayed such fears. He described his principal as a Muslim who is married to a Christian and pastor. The vice president-elect revealed that he deliberately picked an Igbo man of the Catholic faith to be his chief security officer, saying his decision was based on togetherness and inclusivity.
Uplift our nation. As Winston Churchill said, truth is so precious that it has to be surrounded by a bodyguard of lies. In politics, a lot of lies are being traded on as the truth. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I was a child of necessity. There is no any Islamization agenda. Bola Tinubu, Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu is a Muslim who is married to a Christian. Not only a Christian, but a pastor of the Redeemed Christian Church of God. Someone who has not Islamized his family. People are alluding that he has the intention to Islamize the nation. The likes of Bishop Bukka, I want to commend them for giving testimony to the truth. When I was the governor of Borno State, Borno is 90% Muslim. Churches were destroyed by the Boko Haram insurgents in southern Borno. When I expressed my desire to rebuild those churches, I was advised against it. It's tantamount to political harikiri for you to embark on such a venture. But I told the people that the Christians in Borno are stakeholders in the Nigeria project. They are my brothers and sisters.
Time President of the African Development Bank, Akinwumi Additional, has decried the fuel subsidy regime by the federal government, saying it only benefits the rich. Speaking during the presidential inauguration lecture in Abuja on Saturday, Dr. Additional says the continued payment to subsidize petroleum products is killing the Nigerian economy. According to him, fuel subsidy cost the economy of Africa's most populous nation $10 billion alone in 2022. He explained that Nigeria keeps borrowing for what should not be borrowed for, advising that such money should be channeled to national development. Rather than spending billions on crude oil, the AFDB boss called on the federal government to support private sector refineries as well as modular refineries for efficiency and competitiveness. The move, according to him, is necessary to drive down the pump prices of petroleum products.
The place to start, therefore, is to remove the inefficient fuel subsidies. Nigerian fuel subsidies benefit the rich, not the poor. fueling theirs and government's endless fleet of cars at the expense of the poor. Estimates show that the poorest 40% of the population consume just 3% of petrol. Fuel subsidies are killing the Nigerian economy, costing the economy of Nigeria $10 billion alone in 2022. Now that means that Nigeria is borrowing what it doesn't have to borrow for. If it simply eliminates these inefficient subsidies and uses the resources well for national development. Rather, support should be provided to private sector refineries and modular refineries to allow for efficiency and competitiveness to drive down fuel pump prices. The newly commissioned Dangote refinery, by Your Excellency, Mr. President, the largest single-train petroleum refinery in the world, as well as the petrochemical complex, will revolutionize Nigeria's economy.
Catholic Bishop of Sokoto, Matthew Kuka, says Nigerians traveling abroad should do so for the purpose of returning to develop the country. Speaking during an inauguration lecture today, Bishop Kuka said the incoming administration must rise to the challenge of reuniting the country. He said Nigerians traveling abroad must be given a reason to return, adding that the incoming leadership must manage the diversity and create a habitable country.
How do you manage victory? How do you manage victory? How do you mutate from being a politician who was contesting election to being a politician who has won elections? Very often, and what is clear to us in Africa, why religion, why ethnicity, why all these things continue to injure our countries, is largely because we have not come to terms with the fact that power is just about, as somebody said, our turn to eat. Michaela Wrong's book, I know Michaela pretty well, she autographed a copy of her book, but her arguments were most eloquent, because her arguments were largely, if the Kalenjin did very well under Arab Moi, and if your dad and Mwai Kibaki and other people who are, if they've done well, it was almost natural that the man contesting for election against you will say, it is our own turn to eat, and we can see what power has been.
In Plateau State, the government has finally domesticated the child rights law in what some might describe as a Children's Day gift. Chief Judge of the state, Justice David Mann, signs the family court rules at the State High Court complex today. Justice Mann describes the domestication of the law as a milestone and the way forward in ensuring that proceedings relating to the child's rights, privileges, and welfare are well taken care of. Assenting to the legislation, Justice Mann expressed optimism that the rules would simplify the processes of addressing issues of child's rights in accordance with the law. Some of the privileges in the child's rights law include the right to life, the right to dignity of the human person, the right to personal liberty, the right to fair hearing, the right to privacy in family life, as well as the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. You are watching News at 7 on Westernspring Television. Still to come. Germans working in education and cultural sectors to be expelled from Russia next month. We will bring you more on this when we return.
On 16th September 1923, named Harry Lee Kwan and known as Lee Kuan Yew, he was often addressed by his initials of LKY. Lee Kuan Yew was a barrister and the first Prime Minister of Singapore between 1959 and 1990. Educated at Raffles Institution from 1936 to 1940 and the Fitzwilliam House between 1947 and 1949, Lee Kuan Yew established a highly effective and anti-corrupt governance system that midwives the transformation transformation of Singapore into a high net worth income economy within a generation. He never hid his exception to Western mode democratic ideal, which he believed had not assisted developing nations to attain good government. Before his death on 23rd March 2015, the People's Action Party, which he founded, had used its political influence to establish the United World College of Southeast Asia to expand his economic ideas among countries that constitute the Asian Tiger. Westernspring Television identifies Lee Kuan Yew as a major character in history. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela was an anti-apartheid activist who gave his all for the elimination of what has been described as the world's most vicious rule of the unjust and man's inhumanity against man. He was born July 18, 1918 in Mvezo, South Africa. Educated and trained as a successful legal practitioner, he took up the gauntlet of a human activist against segregation by the minority white suprematists in South Africa. At the climax of his trial for treason, orchestrated by the minority South African government, the great crusader for democratic equality was prepared to pay the supreme sacrifice to establish majority rule in his native land. He told white jurists that if achieving freedom for his people was worth his life, he was prepared to die. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in Robben Island, described as the most notorious prison in the world. It was from this same prison that he came out as a free man to assume office as South Africa's first black president in 1994. Westernspring Television identifies Nelson Mandela as a watershed character in history. The history of guns is traced to China. The Chinese had developed a technology civilization that produced devices identified as guns at about 1000 AD. By the end of the 13th century, the devices had become true guns and described as metal barrel firearms that fired single projectiles which occluded the barrel. When did gun become an instrument of war? The first battles to be decided by firearms were between French and Spanish soldiers. The early 16th century warfare included Magnano in 1515, Bicocca in 1522, and Pavia in 1525. The wars were fought in Italy. The gun is a weapon of destruction and death, but humanity sees it as a potent instrument of family destruction. People with guns feel safer even if they don't display it. Westernspring Television identifies history of guns as a watershed event in history. Aminatu, the legendary Queen of Zazzau, is best known to historians as Queen Amina of Zaria, an old world town and capital of the Hausa state of Zazzau. Amina was a great warrior and the first woman to rule the ancient kingdom of Zazzau. Her 34 years as queen witnessed an unprecedented expansion of Zazzau by conquests. Queen Amina of Zaria belongs to the class of Amazons by the might of her army and her strings of conquests. She opened Zaria to trans-border trade and was said to have initiated kola nut cultivation in the ancient kingdom. The Hausa Muslim figure was born in 1533 and died in 1610 at the age of 77 years. Folklores remember Aminatu, the Queen of Zazzau, as a brave, smart and talented leader, whose giant statue now adorns the National Arts Theatre in Lagos, Nigeria, while many educational institutions bear her name. Westernspring Television identifies Queen Amina as a watershed character in history. You're
welcome back. This is still News at 7 on Westernspring television. A reminder of our headlines. Senate approves upward review of Ways and Means loan from 5 to 15%. President Muhammadu Buhari and former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta urged President-elect Bola Tinubu to work towards uniting Nigeria. Plateau State government domesticate child rights law on Children's Day. And on the foreign scene, Germans working in education and cultural sectors to be expelled from Russia next month. Nigeria has joined the rest of the world in celebrating this year's Children's Day event. The day was established in 1954 as Universal Children's Day. It has been celebrated since then on different dates in several countries. But in Nigeria, it is marked on May 27 and observed as a public holiday for children. The theme for this year's edition is Investing in Our Future means investing in our children. In a statement by his media aide, Femi Adesina, President Muhammadu Buhari said every child is special and parents must treat them rightly. We have joining us live in the studios at this time on the Westernspring television news at 7, Sumilola Salami. Thanks for joining us tonight. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing very well, thank you.
Awesome, and happy Children's Day.
Thank you.
So tell us, Tomi, what does it feel like being a Nigerian child?
I'm very proud of being a Nigerian, and I'm very proud of being a Nigerian child. I feel like there's a lot more our country can do for our youth, but I'm still very proud of my country and being a child in Nigeria.
Being a child in Nigeria. I mean, what has it been like compared to some of the stories you may have heard from the older generations? Okay, our parents used to treat us XYZ way. And now, I mean, it's more like this is where this children, you know, wants to be treated, or the law these days permits for the children to be treated. Comparing and contrasting what you may have heard or read online and what it was like or is like for you now being a child, being raised in this country at this time.
So if I compare it to what my parents told me their experience was as children in Nigeria, I'd say there's some good and there's some bad. Okay. For instance, my mom's always talking about how it was safer back then for her. She could go to school even a long distance by herself, so that is different. But at the same time, I feel very lucky because there's like a lot of modern day things that that add to being a child in Nigeria in the present day. There's social media that they didn't have back then. And we Nigerians like to show ourselves a lot on social media. So that is another aspect that I think is very different.
Okay, now looking at you talking about safety, I want to pick you up on security. Your mom told you that they could go longer distances from home to school without even being followed by the parents. What are the challenges for the Nigerian child now looking at security, education?
I know that there are a lot of challenges in Nigeria, especially with regards to children. I mean, look, we just had a 6-month-long ASU strike, and that affected, I mean, teens and young adults in Nigeria all over the country. And then there's also the health sector. I mean, doctors just went on strike. That is not good for anybody in the country, children especially, children that need surgeries or any life-saving treatment. So there's still a lot to be done in a lot of sectors in the country.
What are some of this a lot to be done? You want to give us suggestions? The government's watching you.
Oh, of course, to buff up in the educational sector. I mean, we have a system that could be fixed or could work a lot better. I have my ideas, but I should leave it up to them to solve it for themselves, and just paying more attention in general to the people and the youth. And of course, I always like to say that mental health is also very important, and I just don't think that we prioritize mental health in this country. So that could, of course, be better as well. Let's talk about
the social media, impacts of social media on education for your generation.
Okay, the impact of social media.
Positive, negative?
I think there is a lot of positive.
Okay.
I mean, just looking at the way the youth stood up during the previous election, they just rounded up presidential election, just shows how powerful social media is as a tool to unite the country, but it can also be used as a tool to divide at the same time. I mean, there's so much misinformation on the internet, and anybody can just look something up and pretend to be an expert, and that can cause a lot of harm at the same time.
Okay. Let's talk about governments forming policies. Do you think your generation are being left out?
Yes, I do. I really do, because I haven't heard of any laws recently, except for this Plateau State
today
adding the Child Rights Act. I haven't really heard of any laws particularly to help children or to help the youth. It just feels like, well, just an afterthought, just left on the side for whatever happens to us. I don't really appreciate that.
Okay, now let's talk about the Child Rights Act. Since you've mentioned the Plateau State. How effective do you think this has been cutting across the different states?
It's a good law. It's a good international law that Nigeria has enacted, because, I mean, children need rights, of course, and especially in the north, because there's the issue of child marriages and so on and so forth. That the Child Rights Act specifically prohibits that, and that will protect especially girls everywhere.
And is it something beyond the rhetorics, beyond papers, so we've domesticated it and that's just about it? Or is there work being done thus far, based on your understanding, the information you've been able to glean? Has there been work done to actually implement this and make it real to every child in every state where it's been domesticated thus far?
Definitely not every state is doing the work. I mean, there's a lot of underground rubbish going on, but there are some states, like Lagos State, is very, they are very strict about their Child Rights Act, and even Ocean State, there's not a lot of underground nonsense going on in the background.
You call that nonsense?
I feel like any law that is going to harm a child is nonsense.
Okay, so a word for your generation watching you, children watching you right now, and parents.
A word.
Children, parents.
Okay. To the children, they should have hope, and their voice matters. It's very important that they know that their voice matters, because if you have a voice and nobody's listening and you feel like it doesn't matter, it's not good at all. You lose yourself and you lose any kind of good feeling, like things can get better, because they can. And what you need to do is to stand up and let your voice be heard. And for the parents, they should listen. Just listen and give your child what they need. That's the best they can do for them.
So the child's voice matters, and the parents' listenership, attention also is important.
Paying attention matters a lot.
Amazing. We sincerely should appreciate you, Tomilola, for coming today. Tomilola Salami joining us live on the Westernspring television News at 7, and we're wishing you and every one of your generation happy Children's Day.
Thank you.
We move on, dear viewer. Just recently, Osun State Governor Ademola Adeleke unveiled digital economy policies for the state in a bid to transform it into a tech hub. According to the state government, schools in Osun State will have access to the broadband fiber optic project free of charge to help their students. Joseph Atewe has more on the benefits of this project.
In Nigeria, students and businesses have been stuck with poor connection, and speech becomes distorted and hard to follow due to poor connectivity. It will be recalled that in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic halted major activities in Nigeria and globally, leading to the reduced conversation, limited productivity, and user frustration. Many academic institutions resorted to organizing online classes to teach students, filling up the gaps for the semester, but the impact of the new development was threatened by poor network service operating amongst university, and aside from that, businesses and banking operations face similar threats. From struggling to get data and poor network connectivity to perform assignments for undergraduates with Wi-Fi only available in a few hostels, the Vice President of the Students' Union of Osun State University, Comrade Okunlade Michael, explained to us the sufferings encountered to complete the task due to poor internet access, which is insufficient and unreliable.
Internet is a means of communications not only for any other things, but when it comes to education aspect, it's very important for the student to access some things, to browse, to study online, and other things like that.
The plight of Michael Ogunlade and many other students across the state might soon be over as the Osun State government has started laying fiber cables around the state to enable swift internet connection, which will be made available to schools for free. Disclosing this was the media assistant on ICT to the state governor, Shola Ishola, who also stated that the vision was to improve internet connectivity and mobile communications in the state, as fiber optics was the best solution as it does not affect humans, according to medical practitioners, but will be made available for students free of charge.
We wanted to improve what was on ground, and then we needed to move. It was also at the time when the world was talking about moving from 4G to 5G, and then people were raising the issue of its safety, health concerns for 5Gs. A lot of people were saying that medical practitioners were saying that it could lead to cancer and the rest of them. So fiber optics is the solution to this kind of challenges. Fiber optics does not have the potential to it doesn't have any health adverse effect on anybody. So that was why we needed to move to fiber optics. We needed to improve connectivity.
Mr. Ishola also debunked the claim of free internet connection from the fiber optic initiative for every resident in the state, stating that part of the plan is also to attract investors to partner with the state government.
That's not true entirely. There's a possibility for that. I'm not going to write that out. But as at the state that it is now, what is being done is supposed to attract mobile telcos, telecommunication companies, and internet providers to approach the state government, to have a partnership with the state government. They're supposed to come and patronize the state government because we already have the cable that they are supposed to have laid. Do you understand? So it's not like the cable that we're laying is not so that we can provide free internet services, though it is possible.
This initiative by the Osun State government also excited the Vice Chancellor of Osun State University, Professor Clement Adegboye, as he explained the difficulties lecturers encounters as they have to travel miles to deliver lectures on different campuses of the university located in different local governments in the state. He added that with this optics fiber being brought by the Osun State government, it will solve 90% of the problem of interrupted networks and mobile connectivity.
It's a welcome and very pleasant development in this 21st century in our very dear state, Osun State. I'm so glad that this is happening at this time. Just about 2 weeks ago, I held a meeting with the ICT team in this university, thinking about how to network all the 6 campuses of the Osun State University. As you know, we have the College of Law in Ifetedo, and students in 100 level, and even in 200 levels in Ifetedo, we offer lots of courses in humanities. And humanities is located in Ikire campus. So lecturers do travel a lot, commuting on these dangerous roads around there in the face of kidnapping and banditry. So we were thinking of how to revolutionize teaching so that we create a learning management system that will be able to address our needs by way of delivering lecture in Ikire and receiving it in Ifetedo without having to travel. That was what we were thinking about. And that this is coming now is a great thing for us, because for us to achieve what we were planning, we must have uninterrupted network.
Fiber internet has over the years been known for its amazing processing of data as fast as about 70% the speed of light and has a high tendency to resist electrical interference effectively. According to the latest data on internet speed ranking, Singapore has the world's fastest internet with the United Arab Emirates, Switzerland, South Korea, Sweden, Denmark and Norway, and has been privileged to boast of some of the fastest connections in the world. Hopefully, this new narrative in Osun State will lay an impact on the people and further extend across states in Nigeria. Joseph Atewe, Westernspring Television News.
In Ogun State, police authorities have commenced the search for a 4-man armed robbery gang that escaped with $11 million in Abeokuta, the state capital. It was gathered that the armed robbers operated successfully yesterday as the Oke-Shokori of Abeokuta in the Abeokuta North local government area without being challenged by security operatives. They were said to have fled the scene with their targeted money after dispossessing the car of their victim, a house trader. Police Public Relations Officer in the state, Abimbola Oyeyemi, described it as unfortunate. He said the suspect had escaped the scene before operatives could arrive at the scene. The Ogun State Sector Command of the Federal Road Safety Corps, FRSA, has confirmed the deaths of 4 persons around Mountaintop University along the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, while 2 others survived unhurt. The Chief Routes Commander and Public Education Officer of the sector, Florence Okme, in a statement said the crash, which occurred in the early hours of today, involved 2 vehicles. Ms. Okme stated that the suspected causes of the fatal crash were excessive speed and use of phone while driving, which led to the loss of control on the part of the driver of the Lexus SUV, who rammed into a moving truck. The bodies of the victims are said to have been deposited as the morgue of Real Divine Hospital, Ibafo. On the foreign scene, hundreds of Germans working in the education and cultural sectors will be expelled from Russia next month. The German Foreign Ministry confirmed media reports that Russia had decided to cut the number of German employees from the start of June. They include teachers at the German school in Moscow and staff at the Goethe International Cultural Association. The move follows tit-for-tat expulsions of diplomats and increasingly strained relations between Russia and Germany. Last month, Russia and Germany each declared 40 employees of their respective embassies unwelcome and expelled them. In the meantime, Russian forces have intercepted 2 long-range Storm Shadow cruise missiles supplied to Ukraine by Britain. Russia's defense ministry said it intercepted the missiles and shot down 12 drones in the last 24 hours. Russia did not specify where the interceptions had taken place, but made the announcement in its daily defense ministry briefing. Drone attacks were recorded deep inside Russian territory today, hitting oil pipeline installations. Russia has tended to blame such attacks on Kiev, although Ukraine has not publicly acknowledged launching attacks against targets inside Russia. Sudan's army has called for reservists and retired soldiers to re-enlist amidst the deadly conflict with the rival paramilitary and asked the United Nations to change its envoy to the country. The calls for former soldiers to present themselves at their nearest military base look aimed at strengthening the army in its battle with the Rapid Support Forces paramilitary, but may add fuel to the conflict days into a truce. Sporadic fighting has continued all week, though the ceasefire monitors, Saudi Arabia and the United States earlier said compliance was improving, but the army moves may indicate it is gearing up for a long conflict. An army spokesperson said enlistment would be voluntary. However, Sudan's existing armed forces law says retired soldiers remain as reservists eligible for compulsory re-enlistment. That does not include those who only did Sudan's mandatory 2-year military service. In the United Kingdom, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has insisted that there is nothing in his diary entries that shows further rule-breaking during the COVID pandemic. He was referred to police last week following a review of his official diary as part of the COVID inquiry. The former Prime Minister was approached by Sky News before catching a flight in Washington, and he said any new claims of rule-breaking were absolute nonsense. He said the diary entries were completely innocent.
This whole thing is a load of nonsense from beginning to end, and we made that clear in the statements that I've issued. I think that it's ridiculous that elements in my diary should be cherry-picked and handed over to the police, to the Privileges Committee, without even anybody having the basic common sense to ask me what these entries referred to.
What do they refer to?
There is absolutely nothing in those entries that constitutes rule breaking during COVID restrictions, okay?
Mingling with friends at Checkers.
No, that is absolutely not what those diary entries show. That is not what those diary entries show, and the whole thing is totally nonsensical.
Who is trying to stitch you up, Mr. Johnson? Who do you think is trying to stitch you up?
You may well ask.
Who do you think is trying to stitch you up? Richie Sunak?
It's any. Yeah, I'm trying just. Let's go.
Who is trying to stitch you up, sir? Is it Richie Sunak?
Look, I think it's totally. Where are you? Come on, where are you?
About impeding us, sir.
Yeah.
I've asked you.
It's okay. It's okay. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions, and I'm going to tell you. I just think it's totally nonsensical and bizarre that there are tens of thousands of entries in the Prime Ministerial Diary. I've never seen these things before because I haven't looked through it. None of them constitute a breach of the rules during COVID. They weren't during lockdown. They were during other periods of the restrictions. None of them constitute a breach of the rules. None of them involve socializing. It is total nonsense, and I find it extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary, that these things are handed over by, I don't know quite what authority, the Cabinet Office or whoever, to the Privileges Committee and to the police, without any attempt to establish what these things actually mean or what they refer to, with me. And I can assure you that, and I can assure the public that they're all completely innocent and within the rules. And you talk about a stitch-up. You
spoken about a stitch-up. You said you're being you said originally you were being stitched up by whom? Richie Sunak? I mean, there's talk of a skip fire.
For reasons that somebody somewhere thinks it's sensible to do this. I don't.
There's talk of a skip fire in the Tory party. Would you encourage that? And do you see that as a potential comeback for you?
Serbia's President Aleksandar Vučić has offered his resignation as leader of the ruling Serbian Progressive Party, SNS, following weeks of protests against his rule, but said he would remain head of state. At the party congress in Kragujevac in central Serbia, Mr. Vučić nominated Defense Minister Milos Vučević to replace him as party leader. Both his resignation and replacement had to be formally accepted in a closed session of the Congress. Opposition parties and rights watchdogs have long accused Mr. Vučić and the SNS of autocracy, stifling media freedoms, violence against political opponents, corruption, and ties with organized crime. Mr. Vučić and his allies have denied the allegations. Still ahead, President Buhari asked Nigerians to take assets and investments into account when considering country's debt profile. We have more on these and other business stories after this break. Please stay with us.
The British Empire was the largest and the most powerful in the world. At its zenith, the empire embraced a quarter of the Earth's land surface and imposed her imperial majesty's rule on more than 458 million peoples across nations and continents. The empire took off with overseas possessions and trading posts established by England, spread over 3 million kilometers between 16th and early 18th century. Like previous empires, the British Empire began to crumble on its weight of overstretched territories and growing unrest in our various colonies. Today, the British Empire no longer exists. What is in place is the Commonwealth of Nations, a loose association of sovereign states which recognize the King of England as the titular head. Westernspring Television identifies the British Empire as a watershed empire in history. Born born Jeremiah Oyeni Obafemi on March 6, 1905. Obafemi Awolowo was a prime architect of Nigeria's independence and most consummate advocate of free education and social welfare in Africa's most populous nation. Erudite politician, thinker and philosopher, Awo was fondly addressed by associates and political colleagues, brought his unique attributes to bear on governance in the defunct Western region. He administered as leader of government business and the premier between 1955 and 1958. Obafemi Awolowo's premiership witnessed pioneering in multi-sectoral policy initiatives and execution. The Western region under his administration paraded several enviable records. First television station in Africa, first real estate in Nigeria, first high-rise building in Nigeria, first modern sports stadium in Nigeria, first agricultural settlement in Nigeria, first modern civil service secretariat in Nigeria, and first industrial estate in Nigeria. His face is on 100 naira denomination as a mark of honor for his distinguished services to his country. Westernspring Television identifies Obafemi Awolowo as a major character in history.
You're welcome back. Now to business. President Muhammadu Buhari has asked Nigerians to take the country's assets and investments into account when considering the debt profile. The president said his administration doubled Nigeria's stock of infrastructure to gross domestic product (GDP) from about 20% to over 40%. In a statement posted on Twitter today, the president said the growth is no small undertaking, noting that it occurred amidst the plunge in global oil prices, a recession in the country, and a war in Europe. President Buhari added that without investing in infrastructure, the road out of poverty is a much tougher one. The Debt Management Office had said Nigeria's total public debt reached 46.25 trillion naira at the end of the fourth quarter of 2022. President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, has said there is no justification for Nigeria not having enough power. He made a case for Africa's most populous nation today while speaking during the presidential inauguration lecture in Abuja, the nation's capital. He stated that the nation's private sector is greatly affected by the high cost of electricity, calling on the Nigerian authorities to fix the epileptic power. Speaking on the tax drive, Dr. Adesina wants the federal government to move from tax exemption to tax redemption and also ensure that multinational companies pay appropriate royalties and taxes. He also wants the Nigerian authorities to block tax leakages and revenue collection. Noting that simply raising taxes is not enough, the AFDB boss wants the Nigerian government to provide the basic amenities to the masses. The former agriculture minister also made a case for a reduction in the cost of governance in the country to free up more resources for development.
Your Excellencies, much can be done to raise tax revenue, as tax to GDP ratio in Nigeria is still low. This must include improving tax collection, tax administration, but moving from tax exemption to tax redemption, ensuring that multinational companies pay appropriate royalties and taxes, and that leakages in tax collection are closed. However, simply raising taxes is not enough, as many question the value of paying taxes, hence a high level of tax avoidance. Many citizens provide their own electricity, sink their own boreholes to get access to water, repair their roads in their neighborhoods and in their towns. These are essentially high implicit taxes.
In the meantime, Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, Adeniyi Adebayo, has given a positive assessment of the outgoing administration of President Muhammadu Buhari in tackling the challenges of poor electricity and insecurity nationwide. Mr. Adebayo shared his position today while commissioning the federal government automotive training center in Ekiti State. He expressed the belief that alternative power generation avenues would help industries and investments in Nigeria as he hopes the years ahead would record more successes. According to him, despite the challenges bedeviling the country, the Buhari government achieved much in persuading foreign investors to come to Nigeria. And still in business, Iraq today presented an ambitious plan to turn itself into a regional transportation hub by developing its roads and rail infrastructure linking Europe with the Middle East. Once completed, the $17 billion project, known as the Route of Development, would span the length of the country, stretching 1,200 kilometers from the northern border with Turkey to the Gulf in the south. Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani announced the project during a conference with Transport Ministry representatives from Iran, Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates. War ravaged and beset by rampant corruption, oil-rich Iraq suffers from dilapidated infrastructure. Prime Minister Sudani has prioritized the reconstruction of the country's road network along with upgrading its failing electricity infrastructure. Boxing promoter Eddie Hearn says Britain's world heavyweight champion Tyson Fury has not sent a contract to Anthony Joshua, lining up a September fight. Yesterday, Fury said he wanted to meet Joshua at Wembley later in the year and had already sent a contract. Fury has not fought since retaining his WBC title against the Iraqi Chisora at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in December. Fury has 33 wins and 1 draw from 34 fights, while Joshua, who beat American Jermaine Franklin on points in London in April, has 25 wins and 3 defeats in his 28-fight professional career after winning Olympic gold as an amateur in 2012.
Fight that everyone wants to see. A few days ago, I sent...
Oh, you said I got sent, yeah.
No, I sent...
No, it hasn't. No.
I sent a draft contract to Anthony Joshua. Are you saying that's inaccurate?
Absolutely. No contract been sent to Anthony Joshua.
Okay. So is this just Tyson just writing this, is what you're saying?
Yeah, no, maybe he thinks one has, but they definitely reached out.
Could he been told that that was the case?
No idea. I mean, when I saw that post, I called George Warren straight away and said, what's this? And George Warren said, no, he hasn't been sent a contract. But they have reached out to me to discuss the fight, but no contract's been sent. We're being told by Saudi Arabia that that deal is on the verge of being closed, but we'll see. We'll see. We're not closing the door to a Tyson Fury fight. We're just going to make sure that Anthony Joshua's career goes according to plan and smoothly and not messed around by other people. But, like I said, talking to George Warren on a regular basis.
To football, Manchester City Erling Haaland has become the first player to win the Premier League Player and Young Player of the Year awards on the same season. The 22-year-old striker's 36 goals have seen him break the Premier League record for most goals in a season. Overall, he has scored 52 goals during the campaign. Haaland, who received the most combined votes from the public and the Premier League panel, joined City from Borussia Dortmund last summer and has helped the club win a 3rd consecutive top-flight title. He has already been named the Football Writers Association Men's Footballer of the Year. In Germany, Bayern Munich won an 11th consecutive Bundesliga title as they beat Cologne to overtake Borussia Dortmund on a thrilling final day. Dortmund would have won their first title since 2011-2012 season had they beaten Mainz, but a 2-2 draw opened the door for Bayern. They took advantage thanks to Jamal Musiala's 89th minute winner. A Cologne penalty had cancelled out Kingsley Coman's earlier strike, but Musiala sent the away fans wild. It marked a successful end to the season for boss Thomas Tuchel, who replaced Julian Nagelsmann in March. Valencia's punishment following the racist appeals of Real Madrid forward Vinicius Jr. has been reduced on appeal. The partial closure of the club's Mestalla Stadium has been reduced from 5 to 3 matches. Their fine has also been cut from 45,000 euros to 27,000 euros after the Spanish Football Federation Appeals Committee said it had decided to partially uphold Valencia's appeal. Brazil's Vinicius was subjected to racist chants from the crowd. Spanish police have detained 3 people in connection with the appeals, and Real Madrid, who said it constituted a hate crime, have reported it to the Spanish prosecutor's office. And that's all at this hour. But Before we go, here is a recap of our major stories. The Senate has approved the upward review of the Ways and Means loan accessible to the federal government from 5 to 15%. Outgoing President Muhammadu Buhari and former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta today asked the President-elect Bola Tinubu to work towards uniting Nigerians irrespective of ethnic and political affiliation. In Plateau State, the government has finally domesticated the child rights law in what some might describe as a Children's Day gift. And on the foreign scene, we brought you news that hundreds of Germans working in the education and cultural sectors will be expelled from Russia next month. Please follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at Westernspring Television. You can also watch us live on our YouTube channel at Westernspring Television. I am Damilola Raphael. Thanking you indeed for watching. You have a restful evening.